This is C-SPAN's Afterwards podcast. This week, former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos discusses her book, Hostages No More, The Fight for Education Freedom and the Future of the American Child. She talks about her time serving in the Trump administration and offers her thoughts on education reforms to fix schools.
I think in hindsight, I would have been a lot more assertive about speaking up during the time in which I was waiting for the confirmation hearing. And I had very little support in pushing back against the vitriol.
She's interviewed by Jeb Bush, former governor of Florida.
Betsy, it's such a joy to be with you. Congratulations on the book, Hostages No More, The Fight for Education Freedom and the Future of the American Child. Let's start with the title of the book. How did you come up with the name Hostages No More?
Well, first, Jeb, great to be with you as well. Thanks for doing this. And the title is a provocative one, and it's meant to be. Hostages No More is a direct reference to a quote made by Horace Mann, commonly considered the father of our education system. About 175 years ago, he said that educators are entitled to look upon parents as having given hostages to our cause. And I think the last 2 years have really given families across the country a front row seat into how many ways their children really have been held hostage to a system that for too many of them is simply not working. And so this is a book about what we do to fix American education. And that's the reason for the title and the subtitle about American education freedom, which I'm sure we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. We're definitely going to talk about it. But before that, you talk about your childhood in Holland, Michigan. Tell us about growing up in Holland, about your family. Were you inspired by a mentor or teachers that got you on your life's journey?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Holland, Michigan. Both my parents are, children of immigrant families from the Netherlands, and started out with virtually nothing. My parents mortgaged everything when I was just a young child for my dad to start a business. He was an engineer, and he had a better way of doing things. And so they mortgaged everything and raised some money from family and friends and started a business when I was 7 years old. I remember helping my dad paint the first building and then working throughout the years on the factory line. One of the products that he developed and created was the lighted sun visor for cars. And I was involved as a middle schooler on that first production line, packing, inspecting, and shipping those sun visors. And then later, working third shift in the factory. It was a great experience. They were very hardworking and very entrepreneurial, and always gave my siblings and me the messages that we could do and be anything that we wanted to become. And they really provided amazing role models for me, as did a number of teachers I had growing up. My mom, first of all, was a teacher, a first grade teacher. And then I recall my second grade teacher, Mrs. Walcott, who regularly held up my cursive penmanship papers because I am a left-handed individual, and it was tough for me to learn cursive. But she always encouraged me, so I remember that about her. And I also remember my high school government teacher, Mr. Pothoven, who really helped instill in me a love for politics and policy and really American government.
You're in the book. You mentioned that your dad passed away suddenly, and the business was sold. And your mom, tell the story that your mom decided to make sure that all the employees were taken care of. I thought that was a uniquely American, exceptional kind of act, and it's probably worth knowing.
Well, my mom and dad really were examples throughout my mom's still living. She's just about 90, and both of them were really committed to giving back, and they instilled in all of my siblings and me a love of and for philanthropy of giving, and they gave in many different ways. But what you've referenced, after the sale of the company, my mom took a significant portion of the proceeds and had it given out to all of the employees of the company in the form of a unexpected and unanticipated bonus. It's really been interesting to see the results of all of the opportunities that many of the individuals who were in leadership positions there, they actually went out and started businesses of their own in West Michigan. And it's really been exciting to see how some of the proceeds that they received in the form of bonuses have really seeded additional opportunities and all kinds of new businesses and growth opportunities for others in West Michigan.
That's fantastic. So you dedicate the book to your husband, Dick, who's a phenomenal guy. Can we dig a little deeper, and can you give us a rundown on the rest of your family and grandchildren, which, at least in my particular life, is kind of the most important part of family these days?
Exactly. Well, we have 4 children, all grown and with families of their own. We now have 10 grandchildren and 3 step-grandchildren. So life is very full. The newest ones are 2 months and 6 months, and it's just a blessing to have the voices of youth and the energy of youth around very regularly. I'm looking forward to seeing almost all of them this weekend.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So you and I share a common passion for education reform, education freedom, school choice, parental choice. We've had this shared passion for, at least 30 years. What drove you to make this your life's calling as an adult? You're clearly one of the leaders in the country, and you've stuck with this through thick and thin over many, many years.
Well, it really originated when our oldest son, Rick, who's now 40, was starting kindergarten. And Dick and I knew we were going to be able to have our children go to school wherever we thought was best for them. So I really researched around the area to find the best setting for him. And in the process of doing that, I discovered this amazing little Christian school in the heart of Grand Rapids, really serving the community around it, and began to get involved there as a volunteer. And the more I volunteered, the more I realized that for every child and family that was represented at the school, there were probably 10 or 20 others in the community that would have loved to have that opportunity for their kids, but couldn't because they couldn't afford the tuition. The families in the school couldn't afford the tuition, and the school has to regularly still raise 90% of the operating funds outside of the those who attend the school from benefactors in the community. And the more I got involved, the more I realized that the way we fund or the way we provide for education in Michigan at the time was not fair. It was not right that I could make those decisions and choices to have my child in a faith-based school, but those in that community, if they couldn't get into that little Potter's House school, didn't have that option. So I began working in a 501c3 nonprofit type efforts to make changes. And Jeb, you'll recall early on as well, we thought that through either emotional arguments, stories of people whose lives were impacted, or logical arguments, legal arguments, we could make the case and compel policy change. But it became clear very quickly that the policies were very often controlled by politics. And so that led me into more efforts around the political piece of it that has then, I then started working, nationwide in targeted states that we really tried to make the policy, help the policy changes come about through getting involved in the politics.
So that's really an important point, which is that your motivation was driven by your family and the lack of and just the moral implications of some children being able to have parents that could choose a school and others not. But you melded your civic and political involvement into this policy advocacy. Tell us a little bit about that, because I don't know if people know how active you have been historically in both the policy realm as well as the political realm. You talk about it a lot in the book.
Sure. Well, some people would think that my very first foray into anything regarding education was when I went to Washington to be secretary. But that it actually started, as I said, it started, 35 years ago when Rick was going to enter kindergarten. And Dick and I established very soon after that a scholarship organization that help students, help families first in West Michigan, and then we spread it to all of Michigan to help families access the education they wanted for their children. And then we, in 2000, tried to change. We were involved with leading an effort to change Michigan's Constitution, which has a very, very high Blaine Amendment, which, by the way, the Supreme Court case yesterday has a significant impact on. But we tried to change Michigan's Constitution to allow for kids in failing schools and failing school districts to access other choices. That was not successful in 2000. We may have been a little premature, but the energy of those who supported it was very, distinct. And I said, we can't let this energy go away. We have to help harness it and do something good with it and help, make some changes that we need. And so Michigan had a cap on the number of charter schools that you could have established in Michigan. That was the only way to get that legislation passed a few years earlier. And when that cap was quickly met, there was little political will to change that cap at the time. So we started focusing on legislators who either were supportive of or not supportive of lifting that cap, and began political efforts to ensure that enough legislators were elected to office that would actually support expanding the opportunities for charter schools. So that was really sort of the first effort of bringing the political piece into the policy piece. And because of the success we had, we then moved on, and I was at the time serving on a couple of different national boards around advocating for school choice, but we didn't have that political piece in the mix or in the effort. And so that began a move toward that. And since organizations have started doing that political advocacy work, we've had a lot more success in helping families have that power to find their right fit for their kids' education.
A lot of people probably that are watching our conversation here probably think, look, good ideas, policy that makes sense, it just happens. But what you've learned firsthand over many years, similar to my experience, is that government-run, politicized, unionized bureaucracies just don't go quietly in the night. No matter how logical your arguments are, you have to win politically. Yeah. And I think that's an important lesson to people that are, want to make sure that their child gets the highest quality education. They have to be engaged civically and politically, correct?
Right, absolutely. And I think it's particularly important today as more families have had a front row seat to their children's education the last couple of years. And for a whole host of reasons, many of them are very disappointed with what they have experienced, and rightfully so. And so we see, parents at school board meetings asking questions, and we see, school board membership changing as a result. And I would urge and expand that request to get involved to making sure you're paying attention to who you're voting for state legislators and for members of Congress, because these are individuals who will ultimately decide policy around education now and in the future. And where we want more opportunities, we need to be supporting those individuals who are going to actually support that themselves.
Yep. So let's talk about your nomination to be Secretary of Education and the confirmation process. As a friend watching, not near the area code 202, but down here in Miami, it was painful to watch it because of the vitriol and the ugliness. What was your experience? And I know you're tough. I know you're really tough, but it was hard to watch, to be honest with you. And can you share some experiences in that during that time? And were there any lessons learned?
Well, I obviously went into the whole process not knowing exactly what to expect because I had never studied the process before, having never anticipated the opportunity to serve in a role like that. So I didn't have anything to really compare it to, but upon reflection and in having lived through the whole experience, I think in hindsight I would have been a lot more assertive about speaking up during the time in which I was waiting for the confirmation hearing. And I had very little support in pushing back against the vitriol. And I also had a lot of great folks around me that were trying to help me prepare, but many of them that really didn't know and understand the Department of Education or what I might anticipate in terms of subject areas to be addressed in the process. So, in hindsight, I have a lot of great ideas about how to do it differently, but I did my best getting through, and thankfully we had Vice President Pence who could cast that tie-breaking vote, which was a historic moment. I don't think there has not been another cabinet member having to be confirmed by a tie-breaking vote of the Vice President prior to that.
There haven't been many cabinet secretaries that were so unfairly treated as well, and you handled it with a lot of grace. And then the first day that you show up to work was in the book, it's an amazing story. Please share that with us.
Well, I think we're referring to the second day when I went to visit a school in Washington, D.C.
No, well, we can talk about that too. I'm
Okay.
talking about the Department of Education has 3 buildings, what I
yes.
recall reading.
Yes.
And you shook hands with every person in the building?
I walked through every floor of every building and shook hands with everyone who was there. Now, to be fair, these are very large buildings with lots and lots of workstations, and many of them were populated, and there were a pretty hefty number that weren't. But I shook hands with every single staff member that was there, every single employee, and introduced myself, and then went into the auditorium and did some brief remarks to the whole group. And that was great. It was fun. Although I did, as I mentioned in the book, I did wear heels in that particular case, and it was not a good idea.
So the second day on the job, you go to the school, is that right? Or
the second day on the job, I went to to a middle school in the district, and we were very intent on not making it a big deal. We did not inform anyone of the visit. I just wanted to go quietly and meet the students and the teachers and some of the parents. Unfortunately, someone on the other end, on the school end, apparently released the fact that I was going to be there more broadly, and there were many protesters, lots of media, and it really, the encounter was very unpleasant in that I was literally barred from entering the school, and it was pushed on the stairs, and really sort of physically confronted, and so we had to leave the school. I had to leave with the security person from the Department of Education, drive away, and he said, "Ma'am, I don't think we should go back." And I said, "No, we have to go back, and we need to find a way." And so we did. We got into the school, and I had a great visit. It was a wonderful visit with the teachers and meeting a lot of the students and many of the parents who had come. It was a great visit, but the result of that was, because of the way I had been confronted and really physically barred from doing my job, I ended up having 2 days later, this was on a Friday, and on Monday when I returned to work, I was now protected by a full 24/7 U.S. Marshal detail. They had done a threat assessment and found many viable and alarming threats against me. And so, as regrettable as that was, I'm very thankful that I had the protection of those wonderful men and women. And they really ensured that I could visit and go see places and do things that I needed to do as secretary.
Yeah, these are examples of just the really ugly political culture and culture in general that we now have, where people that you may have a disagreement with are the enemy, and there's very little effort to try to understand the other side. Because why would you want to understand the enemy? It's just, and it's personal, and it's ugly, and it's increasingly violent. It's so sad to watch. Another part of Washington life is the entrenched nature of the bureaucracy. And you tell two stories in the book that I thought were great examples of this institutionalized entrenchment that exists. Much more, I think, in D.C. than other, like local and state government. I don't think has the same degree of just craziness about protecting people that aren't serving. They're there to make a paycheck and not necessarily do their job. So one story was the story that you talked about books in the basement and a large closet that you wanted to donate. And the other story, if you could share with us, is the receptionists that weren't tele-receptionists. I'm not sure. That's only a term in the Department of Education, apparently. But to share those two stories, because I think it does give you a sense of how frustrating it must have been as someone coming with a passionate desire to empower parents was confronted by not just a hyper-politicized environment, but also this bureaucracy.
Sure. Yes, the book story was a very frustrating one, because we learned early on that there were literally thousands of books being stored down in some storeroom in the basement of the main building of the department. And so we set about to try to get them out of that storeroom so we could actually bring them to schools when I was visiting, and anybody else on the team that was visiting schools. Well, we found out that there was only one key to that storeroom, and there was only one individual who had control of that key, and he only was in the building very occasionally, so we had to figure out actually when he was going to be there. Got that figured out, and then when he went to open the door, he said, "But you can't take these books out yourself. You have to get someone from the union staff to come and move them for you, and so I'm not going to allow you to take the books out today." So that set about a whole nother process of coordinating the one man with the key with the union staff that also had their own unique schedule to go and unlock and unload books out of that particular storeroom. Just an example of inefficiency, bureaucratic processes that make no sense at all. And before I tell the receptionist story, there's one other one that to me it's just appalling that we can and do allow this to happen, because I'm sure it's not unique to the Department of Education. There was one individual that I became aware of whose job required her to be on a computer all day long, and it was discovered that she had not logged onto the computer for over 2 years. And so, and yet it was impossible to fire that person. So again, just another example. And then the receptionist story, inside the end of the building where my office and those on my team, there's probably 20-some people that worked on that end of the building. And it was a reception area that two individuals sat at to receive people coming in to meet with anybody on that end of the building. And again, very early on, one morning, my deputy chief of staff went to ask these individuals a question, and neither of them were there. And she was very puzzled by that, rightfully so, and learned that both of the individuals, it was their day to telework. Now, their job was to actually receive people. And so we were all very puzzled as to how and why they could telework in a position like that. And so we quickly righted that situation with individuals who were actually going to be there. But again, just another example of all of the the impediments and also the bureaucracy that we had to deal with on a regular daily basis.
Man, my blood pressure would have been way too high having to experience that. So you say in the book that Washington is a lonely place for Federalists, and as a governor, I really appreciate that. But tell me what that meant, and how you used your position to try to shift power back to the states.
Well, everything we did, I said, everything we do needs to follow the law first and foremost, but devolve as much power away from Washington and away from that department as is possible. And that was difficult for even some of our Republican friends on the Hill to understand, because and I understand the propensity to, when you are in a place where you have a majority or are able to influence policy, you want to influence it in the direction you want to take it. But my contention particularly with education, is that this is really primarily the role of the states. And in fact, the Department of Education, in my view, probably should not exist and should never have been created. So everything we did was to really devolve as much power to the states and give them as much latitude around decision-making as was allowable by law. It started with the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which, of course, there were all kinds of regulations ready to go. They were, I think the law passed assuming that Hillary Clinton was going to be elected president, and they were going to be able to add on all of these rules and regulations. Congress quickly pulled those back, thankfully. But that allowed us to really look at state plans for the Every Student Succeeds Act and then turn them around back to the states as quickly as possible, as long as they were following the requirements of the law. But like I said, there were a lot of our Republican colleagues who liked to see their own special provisions added in and or applied when it worked for their philosophy.
Probably the transcendental, more transformative event of, in the last 20 years has been the pandemic. You were secretary when the pandemic hits. People are scared. There was very little information to start with. Tell me what your role was. I know you created a commission, a task force, and kind of go through that process of what Washington was like dealing with all these unknowns. And then if you could explain to me which states you think have done better than others and why.
So, yes, obviously in March of 2020, there were a lot more questions than there were answers. And what we knew initially was that we could take steps to pause the payments on student loans, which we did immediately. And then make ourselves available in any way possible to state leaders, knowing that states were going to have to navigate this unique to each state. And as it became clearer as the spring moved on, that kids were not catching this disease and were not spreading it like adults did, that the opportunities for getting back into classroom settings were very real and should have happened for most kids, if not all. And so we tried and did everything we could to support states making that decision and that call. And when the initial COVID relief package was passed, we got that money out to states and available within I think even shorter than the required time period by Congress, which was a no small feat. And so every state and district had the opportunity to access these funds for whatever they needed to make their schools safe and healthy for their kids to be in. But it was just amazing to me how many did not set about with the goal of getting kids back in class and in person. And as that wound on through the summer, and there were so many states and large urban areas with no plan for getting kids back into the classroom, it was very concerning. And so we did everything we could to urge and encourage them to do just that, and had pledged our support in any way we could give it to ensure that they had the resources they needed. But it was a very frustrating time in that so many kids were kept out of the classroom for months longer than they ever should have been. And today, we don't even begin to know the scale of impact and harm that has befallen on millions of kids across the country.
So on the public health side, we do pretty much know, don't we, that the effort to shut down schools had the public health impacts were actually, I think kids probably got sicker at home than they would have in the classroom with schools open. But that's now clear, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Going forward, hopefully we learn from that lesson that apart from the obvious need to have have kids in school so that moms and dads can work, there was no health impact for states like Florida and others that stayed open for a longer period of time.
Right. Well, and frankly, many parents saw charter schools and private faith-based schools opening right back up and serving kids. And so again, I think this has the pandemic and how the system handled it has really opened a lot more families' eyes to the lack of control and the lack of influence they've had.
Yeah, so you bring up an interesting point. Normally, historically, when there's been a massive disruption, and this certainly was one of those, there's been, coming from that, there is a surge of innovation that, propels us forward.
Right.
And tell us about some of those innovations that took place. You mentioned homeschooling, which grew double-digit across all racial boundaries, black families, Hispanic families, white families, all had double-digit increases, some more than that. And then private schools did not see a decline, even though parents, their pocketbooks were stretched. Charter schools were up. Traditional public school had a decline. So out of that, what are the innovations that you see that could be more sustainable, that could last for a longer period of time post-pandemic?
Well, I think a lot of these experiments out of necessity, some of the little homeschool consortiums where a few families got together and they hired a teacher who was upset with how, his or her district was handling the situation. And so they had a teacher for, a handful or 10 or 12 kids. Seeing those kinds of solutions, and for many families that they're working very well, the policy to support that really is around these education savings accounts, which would allow families the greatest flexibility to address the needs of their children based on what they've discovered has worked for them. And those kinds of innovations really need to have room to continue to grow, and more of them to be established. If they're successful for some families, they will certainly be successful for others. And I think it's actually a great opportunity for teachers as well, because, again, I think many teachers were very frustrated with how their system and how the system navigated and handled this. And so I think for teachers to have the same sorts of freedom and innovative, creative opportunities themselves is a real opportunity and a real bright silver lining from the pandemic as well.
What do you think of the explosion of what they're calling pods?
Yeah.
As an example of that, right?
Yes, pods, micro schools, call them what you want. It's what it amounts to essentially is a handful of people getting together saying, we're going to learn together. It's often multi-age children, multi-level learning, and sort of the one-room schoolhouse model again. And again, because we have so many more tools and so many more resources in terms of curriculum and ways to receive and move through curriculum, many mastery-based programs which are perfectly suited for kids who don't want to sit and be measured by how much time they sit in their seat, but how they progress through concepts. Really, the Pandora's box has been opened, and now policy has to support families finding those solutions that are working for their children.
The exciting part of this is that this is parent-driven. This is parents now, I guess, they were the teachers for months of their kids. They saw the lack of response to their needs in some districts and got frustrated. And from this, it's been a spark, I guess, to really have significant parent engagement, which is the way education freedom will move forward, right?
Exactly. No, exactly. I think parents have sensed a power. They've been awakened to the need for them to be involved in their kids' education in a way that many of them had not realized before. And in doing so, they've also realized that they really do have an important role to play, and importantly, they can figure this out. They do have the ability to help make sure their kids are in a place in a way that is really engaging them and in a place where they're learning.
Absolutely. So we briefly mentioned the learning losses. I haven't seen any studies, research-based kind of data that would suggest there have been learning losses, but anecdotally, it appears to me that the losses are devastating, particularly for younger kids, particularly for the kids that were struggling prior to the pandemic. Yeah. What are the is there data now that's been collected that verifies what I think is likely to be a really serious challenge? And B, what are the recommendations that you believe need to be made? What do you recommend that policymakers and schools across the country do to deal with this huge gap that probably is built up?
Well, the studies that I've seen or the references I've seen have been mostly anecdotal as well. But I know that McKinsey had, even before we've come completely out of the pandemic, had estimated 5 months to well over a year learning loss, again, depending on how long a child was out of the classroom. And this is going to be a longitudinal issue, right? We're going to have to keep measuring. I did see, though, that Sweden just released a study earlier this week. They had not, other than the 2 weeks initially, 2 or maybe 2 to 4 weeks initially, had not closed down schools. They went immediately back to school, and they have determined no learning loss for students in Sweden. So it's going to be really concerning, even more concerning for students in the U.S. that were out for a year or more in many cases. And as we've talked about, the ones that were out of class the longest or out of in-person learning the longest are the ones who can least afford it, the most vulnerable kids. And in some cases, their families were able to find other options through some of these other creative solutions. But the point being that only with policies that support education freedom are we really going to see the opportunity for many of these kids to catch up and then surpass where they were before. Because going back to and doing the same thing, is not going to bring about better results for these kids.
So you mentioned in the book that that education freedom, parental choice in the pandemic environment and the post-pandemic environment has exploded across the country. And you correctly, I think I agree with you that these are state policy drives this, and local implementation is the key. Give us a little rundown on the states that you're most excited about in terms of transforming the system where parents are really given the power as informed consumers, where they get the information and can make choices best for their kids.
Well, I always reference Florida, which, of course, you, Jeb, led the way on creating options and opportunities and education freedom. And thankfully, your successors and successive state legislatures have continued to build on the significant steps you took now more than 20 years ago to provide these opportunities. And I see Florida continuing to push forward on that and to making those options. I hope that Florida is the first state to offer universal education freedom. Time will tell, but I'm also very encouraged by what Governor Ducey and legislators in Arizona have continued to push on, and same for Indiana. Wisconsin, Ohio have some signs of real progress and growth as well. And then importantly, we've seen this issue really inform many of the primary races this year in states where there haven't been programs and where there's been legislation introduced in the past, but there simply hasn't been broad enough support. But this issue has really popped to the top of the list for many states, and importantly so. I think in this next year or two, we're going to see some more major gains.
I agree with you, and I think if you look at this as both of us are kind of veterans in this fight, some states started earlier on the journey, but now many states are expanding charter schools, looking at ESAs, aggressively pursuing parental options, and states that 10 years ago would have never considered are starting to do it. So
exactly.
And I think parents are the ones that made that happen. That's kind of the core element of the book, that you trust parents over bureaucracies, and I wish more people did. Yeah,
and I have great optimism also for my home state of Michigan, which is in the middle of getting an education savings account, a significant one, established after the governor vetoed the legislation. We have a citizen-led petition initiative to represent that same legislation back to our state legislature, and if they successfully pass it again, it will become law without her signature, and this will provide opportunities for tens of thousands of kids in Michigan.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So let's switch to a place where the Department of Education has more of a say, which is higher education, but it has more of a say for a financial reason, not necessarily. Well, it's bad policy, which is our student loan program. Tell us about where we are with the student loan program. President Biden is talking about granting immunity, if you will, for thousands and thousands of borrowers. What's the status of the student loan program, and what would you do if you had a magic wand? What would you do differently?
Well, this is something that I started sounding the alarm on early on in my tenure. The student loan or the student debt at that point was just shy of $1.5 trillion. It's now grown to over $1.7 trillion. And it is just inconceivable to me that we have not addressed the fact that federalizing student aid in 2010, supposedly to pay for Obamacare, which it did not do clearly, was the start of more runaway costs on the part of tuition increases on the part of higher ed institutions, and more students taking out student debt that for higher degrees. But where we are now is, President Biden's under tremendous pressure from the far left to forgive all kinds of student debt. Not only is that ill-advised, it's illegal, and also, even if it was legal to do, it has no merit. 2 out of 3 Americans have not taken out student debt or attended higher education. And so the notion that we would ask 2 out of 3 of them to pay for the student debt of those who knowingly made that decision is simply unfair and untenable. Secondly, what about all the students that faithfully have paid down their student loans? or whose families saved for their higher education, or for the veterans who earned their higher education funds through the GI Bill. Nothing about this is right or fair, and even if you did wave a wand and forgive a bunch of student debt, where would that leave you? It doesn't fix anything. It doesn't change anything. And so Congress and the president really need to go back to the drawing board, and I would argue wind down the federal student loan program and allow it to go back to the private sector as it was before. And in the process of doing that, expect more from institutions on showing how their value really matters to the students they're supposed to be serving.
So it seems to me that a bottom-up approach, if you phase down or phase out the student loan program, a bottom-up approach could create all sorts of interesting options. I mean, you look at our friend Mitch Daniels, who has completed his tenure at Purdue, a great university. He has not raised tuition for how many years now?
Over 10 years.
10 years.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, his whole time in office.
Better outcomes, low costs. States like Tennessee are providing incentives for kids on a merit-based basis to earn credits in a very low-cost way. Florida has very low tuition. It seems like you're punishing the people that are doing the innovative work by allowing the federal government's involvement in the student loan program to take away the incentives for innovation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely right. And there is every opportunity to really support a lot of these innovations in meaningful ways that are not going to penalize the innovation and are not going to keep rewarding those that keep doing the same thing the same way and providing less results for students.
So the term wokeness, a term that I didn't know until about 4 or 5 years ago, is a very interesting topic in our universities today. The council culture, the illiberalism of the institutions themselves. You were secretary when this kind of took hold and became much more relevant all across the country. How do we deal with wokeness? How do we make sure that our universities are places where there's inquiry, where your views are challenged, where you learn rather than be indoctrinated?
Well, arguably, much of this starts in the K-12 years, where students today, by and large, are not learning how to really debate ideas and to analyze concepts, and are going into higher ed institutions very malleable and then getting pushed by a far left-leaning faculty and bent on so many college campuses. We were very clear to go and push back on those instances where the First Amendment, the opportunity to speak freely about lots of different things, was being abridged, and we made sure that we would highlight those incidents wherever we could. This has got to be something that collectively we say enough. We have got to change direction and ensure that, first of all, students arrive at college prepared for the experience of college. And I would, again, argue far too many of them are not prepared to do, first of all, the work of higher education, and secondly, contend with a lot of different ideas. Education is for honing your core philosophies and exchanging ideas and debating the merit of different issues. And I think that the woke trends have certainly now gotten the attention being paid to them is good, because I think common sense people are going to start to push back and say we're not going to sign up for this and be part of this any longer. And that has to extend to corporate America as well.
Absolutely. So you're actively re-engaged in philanthropic endeavors. What's the role of philanthropists in this case? I mean, a lot of these universities receive hundreds of millions of dollars from wealthy donors that love their universities, but is there a role for them to play to be able to kind of accelerate the purging of wokeness?
Well, I think a lot of philanthropists for whom this issue is very important and who are paying attention are actually either pausing or withdrawing their support for these institutions that are not standing up and saying, we actually support and protect the free and open exchange of ideas on our campus. And I think that this is not a light switch moment. It's more of a rheostat or a dimmer moment where I think we're going to see more pressure put on institutions if they do not readjust and take a different tact in this whole battle and issue.
So there's a growing awareness in our country that a four-year degree still has value, but it's not the only path for people to live purposeful lives and to rise up. Talk to me about the career pathway movement. Is there a role for Washington? Apprenticeships? How do we accelerate a logical trend to give different paths for the great diversity of young people in our country?
Well, this is something that our administration really put a focus on in an effort to help provide new vehicles and support for the industry-recognized apprenticeship program, which has great promise for alternate career pathways beyond high school. Was just in the early stages of being implemented in partnership with private enterprise and many companies who on their own are actually addressing these issues and providing their own solutions. But the IRAP actually was going to help provide more robust and integrated opportunities, and predictably the Biden administration canceled the program almost immediately. That should be reinstated and expanded upon, and in concert with that, there needs to be more. I think more research. Not research. There's plenty of research done, but there has to be more report on what the four-year institutions that students are graduating from today with presumably not insignificant student debt. We added information to the college scorecard that will help provide meaningful data for students to look at down to the field of study at each institution to see, importantly, what you will earn after you graduate from that particular program. Previously, it was reported as an average by institution, which of course masks very significantly the highest and lowest end of the spectrum. And so for many of these graduate or undergraduate degrees, there is not a payoff. There is you look at it and you look at the cost versus what you're likely to earn in years 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I hope that will help students become more discerning about the directions they take and to evaluate, do I go to a four-year institution and take this area of study and look forward to earning this, or is another career pathway really something I should look at more closely?
So with the few minutes we have left, I thought it'd be appropriate to talk about January 6th. You were in D.C. Can you talk about your experiences on that day and lessons learned on a really tragic day, I think, in American history?
Well, I was in my office that morning and then was urged to go to my home because there were rumors of unrest, and the more I saw and the more I thought about what children were seeing and viewing that day, the more upset I became. The president could have and should have done more to stop what was happening, to call people back. And when that didn't happen, it really was a bridge too far for me. And as you know, I submitted my letter of resignation the next day. I had come to Washington to serve students, and to serve the American people. And it was an honor to have that opportunity from President Trump. But I had been frustrated after the election that we had a window of time where we could have conceivably gotten the Education Freedom Scholarship tax credit into the second COVID relief bill, and but there was so much chaos and not focus within the White House itself around what some of the possibilities were, and that was frustrating. I got to a point, we knew we had done everything we could for and on behalf of students. So, January 6th was kind of that the lack of action there really kind of sealed things for me.
Well, I know you love the Constitution, and I think it's your prayer and hope that high school students particularly, but across the country, that we reconnect with our heritage, with that we're understand our history and respect the institutions that have created the greatest country on the face of the earth. That's one thing. I'm very optimistic about a lot of things, but I worry about the disunity that exists because we don't appreciate our common heritage.
Well, that's another very good argument for why we need to ensure that all students have an understanding of the founding of our country, the founding documents, the history that we have continued to build upon, and the Constitution anchors that all.
So, Betsy, thank you so much. This is a great book. I really enjoyed reading it. I hope people will pick it up and read it. Before I let you go, can you tell me what book you're reading right now?
Right now, I am reading a book called Under Money.
Under Money. I think I read it.
Yes.
It's fiction, but kind of not.
It's fiction, but kind of not. We'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you so much. You served with distinction and honor, and I admire you so much for all that you've done.
Well, thank you so much, Jeb. It's great to talk with you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Hope so.
Thanks for listening to this week's Afterwards podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, listen to C-SPAN's podcast about books. Learn about the latest nonfiction books and best-selling authors. In each episode, we report on bestsellers lists and book reviews from around the country. You'll also hear authors talking about their latest books and insider interviews with nonfiction book publishing industry experts.